I have a legal note.
Do you want to take this one, Joy, or are you
Matt
good?
Gaetz has long denied all allegations and has not been charged with any crime.
That's true.
Also, another legal note. Pete Hegseth's lawyer said he paid the woman in 2023 to head off the threat of a baseless lawsuit.
Oh.
He has denied any wrongdoing.
That's interesting. Pay off the witness.
All right, guys. So it seems like The View should change their name from The View to Legal Notes, right? Because it seems like a vast majority of their programming nowadays is just them reading legal notes after going on unhinged rants against Republicans and conservatives and people that they disagree with, right? Saying all types of things that are borderline defamatory and that could get them sued. So in order for them to cover their collective asses, they have to come out here and to humiliate themselves by essentially telling the truth about the situations that they are talking about, which is that a vast majority of the individuals that they are trying to smear haven't been convicted of the things that they are being accused of. There's no real evidence that they've done these things. They're just accusations, right? And it's getting to the point now where it's pretty embarrassing. And The View is wondering, why is it that they don't have the same credibility as somebody like, for example, Joe Rogan, who they smeared on their platform. Like, again, they smear everybody else as a dragon believer, right? They basically went after Joe Rogan for believing in dragons on their show, as they cope about the fact that Joe Rogan is more relevant and has more credibility than they do. Take a look.
People want us divided, and they aren't just here in this country. They're foreign adversaries who are infiltrating our social media because it is prudent for us to stay that way. But so when you see something that really pisses you off, you should triple check that one.
Yeah. But I think that that's why people like our show, because they know that we are checked by ABC News. But
we're checked by everybody.
Yeah. I mean, if we're wrong, we have, the legal note here.
The human legal note.
But we went from Walter Cronkite basically to this guy, Joe Rogan, who believes in dragons. I checked it. He believes in dragons? He believes in dragons.
Did you triple source that?
Yes, I did. And he also thinks that dragons, like dinosaur type of animals, roamed the earth when people did. So this is the type of really, really bad information that's going out there.
Well, in defense, there are some really good news.
It's possible that Donald Trump did roam the earth when dinosaurs were here.
There are some really good news kind of influencer types, and I think it's great that they're getting information about global and current events in front of younger people who maybe don't tune into traditional media. But to Sarah's point, there has to be some fact checking and actually verification of the things that are shared, because I spend a lot of time on Instagram Reels and I'm served up things that I get outraged about, and then I realize, oh, that's not even true, but I have the sense to go and look it up. But what I do worry about with this, like the Blue Sky versus X, because a lot of people I follow on X, Twitter, have now left to go to Blue Sky, I worry we're all going into our own echo chamber. So we had this, this election that was tense. Donald Trump won, and the right is going to stay on X, and then the left is all going to be on Blue Sky. How do we try to talk to each other?
Unfortunately, I will have to say, the other side, I think, has driven people away, because it's not just discourse. It's nasty name calling and coming after your family, and I'm going to do this to you. And I don't think anyone should have to take that from anybody if they don't have to. Well, so I'm not sure. And I think a lot of Republicans who also are getting that because they have opinions that may differ from what is being said, they're moving as well. Because, and I know why also, because, as I believe, Elon Musk is the actual vice president.
Yeah, so the obvious irony of what Joy Behar was stating there is that she believes that The View is some fact-based talk show, right? Just because they have to read legal notes. And again, the only reason they have to read legal notes is quite literally because they're not fact-based, right? If they stuck to the actual facts, they wouldn't have to read legal notes, right? The whole point of the legal notes is to cover their asses because, again, they're not actually really fact-based, right? And you know this because Joy Behar essentially smeared Joe Rogan as a dragon believer and claims that she fact-checked this, right? She knows that Joe Rogan believes in dragons, right? She looked into it. Except when you actually look into what she's stating about Joe Rogan, she's referencing an episode in which Joe Rogan had a conversation with a guest about whether or not dragons lived long ago and why people, ancient people, depicted dragons in their art. And when you actually listen to the context of the conversation, it is clear that Joe Rogan is not a dragon believer. Take a look.
So around the same time period in, China, South America, Africa, all these different, Rome, all these places, images depicted people fighting dragons, right? And every dragon was slightly different, but it was all a giant scaly animal that could fly. So when you break that down, you think about the fact that large birds had a hard time being fossilized because their bones are so porous, right? So because they have like hollowish bones, they break down very easily and they don't fossilize. So the group that says this, basically they're saying the evidence is the reason there's no fossils of dragons is because they had bird bones and they were actually very delicate animals. But a handful of these small population of these giant flying lizards existed and basically encompassed all these different countries where they all depicted fighting dragons in their own way, and they were all killed off by knights or whatever it is, and then didn't fossilize.
What?
So it's like the science is saying that if there were lizards big enough to fly around and eat people, they didn't have bones that could fossilize.
So it'd be like an eagle,
right? And that's why all these human populations around the world have depictions of them, because they did actually exist.
Now, are there any stories of dragons written in the times of people that they actually had the written word, or is it just depictions?
I don't know. Not my field.
That would be interesting, because are these depictions ancient accounts told by generation after generation, passed down?
I think so. I don't know. I don't know anything about dragons or whether it's real, but I think it's interesting to think, oh, well, the science supports that if there were flying lizards, their bones wouldn't have fossilized, and these have been passed down, stories that have been exaggerated and passed down from generation to generation.
And some of them breathe fire, but some of them don't, depending upon
which culture it was significant to.
I wonder what the fire is supposed to represent, or they're just people are full of shit.
Probably that one.
Yeah, it's probably made it sound even cooler.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Not only did I kill him, he was trying to burn me.
Yeah, so clearly, Joe Rogan is not a quote-unquote dragon believer, at least not the way that Joy Behar is trying to smear him. In that conversation, they were talking about possible theories for why ancient people believe that dragons exist, or why dragons were depicted, okay? And again, that is the context of the conversation, but apparently Joy Behar, whose listening comprehension skills needs work, interpreted that in a whole nother way to smear Joe Rogan as somebody that believes in dragons, right? And even if Joe Rogan believed in dragons, he would still have more credibility than The View, because their whole show is a fantasy, right? So again, they can get mad at Joe Rogan for possibly believing that dragons existed or whatever. And I don't know, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. Regardless, The View, they're not living in reality. So again, it doesn't really matter that much. And furthermore, this is just one of many times in which the media has just flat out lied about Joe Rogan or mischaracterized things he said, things that he has done, to try to drive some narrative about him that isn't grounded in reality. Like, you guys all remember CNN trying to smear Joe Rogan over the COVID medicines that he was taking, right? Things that were given to him by his doctor, but yet CNN felt like they were the arbiters of COVID. And if, you are taking medicines for COVID that they don't say you should be able to take, then therefore you are spreading misinformation, disinformation. You're a dangerous person, right? Them just, flat out going on a crusade against Joe Rogan during the pandemic. And again, these people on the left, these are the same people boohoo-whining and crying about not having their own version of Joe Rogan. But they had a Joe Rogan back in the day when Joe Rogan was a Bernie Sanders supporter, right? He was on board with the left, but the left said, you know what? We don't like you anymore because you don't agree with us 100%. So therefore, you're now right wing, right? You're right wing now. They pushed Joe Rogan away, and then these same people boohoo-whining and crying, why don't we have a Joe Rogan, right? It's like, well, you had him, you just didn't want him. So Joe Rogan is trolling The View now, okay? And he changed his bio to dragon believer, okay? He basically said, you know what? I am going to embrace this label of dragon believer. After essentially responding to this conversation in which they tried to smear him and his credibility, right? So he basically is having a conversation on X in which, you know, people are talking about dragons and whether or not they existed or them possibly existing. And he said, I want to believe, right? I want to believe. Okay. So with that being said, the real problem here, right, is the fact that the media is currently boohoo, whining, and crying about so-called social media influencers, political influencers online having more credibility than they do, right? They're upset, they're mad because audiences, particularly young people, are getting their news from people online, right? They're turning away from CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC. They're turning away from those outlets and they're going online for news. And this is what they really, really, really don't like.
1 in 5 adults regularly get their news from influencers on social media. The number is even higher among younger Americans, with almost 40% under the age of 30 getting their news from those sources. According to the Pew Research Center, the social media site X remains the most widely accessed platform, followed by Instagram and YouTube.
I mean, that comes obviously for political news. And Mike, that's the challenge. You grew up in a newsroom like Gene grew up in a newsroom. I mean, that's a lot of challenge. That's a challenge for a lot of mainstream media sources is, do they make themselves relevant again to here 20% of adults who actually get influencers on social media?
I don't know
maybe somebody who makes baskets, and while they're making baskets, they look up and say, vote for candidate X.
I don't know how they make themselves, how we make ourselves relevant again, because we can't compete with 20-second snippets on an iPhone, walking up the street,
morsels,
getting your entire news digest of the day in less than a minute on your phone as you're walking under the crowd with coffee in one hand and your phone in the other. I don't know how we catch up to that.
Yeah, so this is just another example of how the media is so disconnected from reality, right? They think that people are really getting their news from social media influencers who are basically covering a topic for 1 minute at a time. And that's actually not what's happening, right? People are going to so-called social media influencers and political influencers not for short form content to get their news. No, they're actually paying attention to long form content. Okay. Podcasts, right? Joe Rogan's podcast is like 2 or 3 hours long at a time. And people are actually consuming their news in ways in which they can get real conversations, real analysis, and not just this type of misleading propaganda and Trump derangement that is prevalent on mainstream liberal media outlets like MSNBC, right? Like, for example, there's a lot of outrage over this headline here from MSNBC in which they claim Laken Riley's killer never stood a chance. Laken Riley's killer never stood a chance. What do you think that the layman, somebody who knows nothing about this case, would believe about this case from reading this headline, right? What do you guys think they would believe about the murderer here, right? They would believe that, oh, wait, this was a miscarriage of justice, that this guy never stood a chance in the sense that somehow his trial was unfair, right? This is what they will believe. And again, this is why they're getting a whole lot of backlash over this, right? A whole bunch of people are upset, calling it absolutely sickening, okay? This person says, you know who never stood a chance? Laken Riley, the actual victim, who they don't give a damn about, by the way. And this is also the reason why the media lacks credibility, is because of all the constant gaslighting when it comes to the issues, right? Like illegal immigration, right? They swear up and down that this guy murdering Laken Riley had nothing to do with Joe Biden, right? It had nothing to do with the sanctuary city policies, the open border policies, the soft on crime policy. It didn't have anything to do with that. The illegal immigrant problem is not connected to crime. That's made up, right? All this stuff is made up. It doesn't exist, okay? And even if it does exist, even if it is true, it's not Biden's fault. It's not the Democrats' fault. No. It is Trump's fault. That is what ABC News basically try to argue in their coverage of this. Take a look.
This death of Laken Riley and the subsequent trial has essentially been a massive political lightning rod here in this country. And you said it there yourself, the president-elect campaigning on the death of Laken Riley and pointing to the current administration, saying that their laws and what they're calling failed policies contributed to Laken Riley's death. I want to remind you that Ibarra entered this country illegally in 2022, according to law enforcement officials, and he was paroled and released for further processing by ICE. And since that time he entered the country, he was arrested another time. Law enforcement officers saying that he was arrested in 2023 in New York City and charged with acting in a manner to injure a child less than 17, as well as a motor vehicle violation. But it's important to note that although there is very little evidence indicating a connection between immigration and violent crime, this is still something the President-elect Trump, several Republicans on the Hill wanted to essentially plant their flag on and point that to the current Biden administration. All of this vitriol that we're hearing from Republicans and President-elect Trump regarding the policies of the Biden administration, it's important to know that President-elect Trump did force Republicans to essentially tank a bipartisan border security bill that both sides of the aisle said would have essentially addressed border security and immigration issues, Kira.
Yeah, and this is why the mainstream liberal media doesn't have any credibility. This is why these so-called journalists do not have credibility, right? Nobody respects modern day journalism because it's not journalism, it's propaganda, okay? And these same people will boohoo, whine, and cry because you don't respect them as journalists and because you have people like Joe Rogan and social media influencers, political influencers having more credibility and clout than they do, right? Having more of an ability to affect the outcome of the election and people's thoughts on certain issues than they do. This is what they're really upset about. Base Mike Lee says, Laken Riley's killer is now the victim, according to MSNBC. Trump Jr. says, you literally can't make up this level of depravity. These people are sick. The guy is a murderer. He's an illegal alien that killed an innocent young woman, but MSNBC would rather go to bat for him. However much you hate MSNBC, it's not enough. Stephen L. Miller says, and this is why MSNBC, the brand, is being sold off for pennies. Facts. Facts. Defiant L says, hey, MSNBC, do you know who also never stood a chance? Laken Riley. Laken Riley should be alive today, but she never stood a chance because of this monster. Adam Johnson says, look at how MSNBC framed the conviction and sentencing of Laken Riley's killer. Jose Ibarra never stood a chance. No, Laken Riley never stood a chance against this monster. Absolutely sickening. Yeah, so again, people are backlashing against this. And this is why X is such an important platform, because it matters, right? This stuff being called out matters, and it has an effect. And the outrage was so much that MSNBC decided, you know what, we got to change the headline, okay? MSNBC alters sickening Laken Riley killer headline after outrage online. Yeah, so they change the new headline to Laken Riley's killer. The guilt of Laken Riley's killer was never in doubt, right? So that's what they did. They altered the headline because the original headline was misleading, okay? It really was. And this is just another example of why people don't trust the media, right? So people like Joy Behar really should be introspective in regards to why is it that people like Joe Rogan have credibility and people like them not so much, right? Even though she thinks they have credibility, they don't have credibility, right? And the rest of the liberal media is losing credibility as well too, and it's because of stuff like this, right? I mean, Joy Behar basically falsely claimed that Joe Rogan was a dragon believer, right? Because her listening comprehension skills are poor, and she basically stated this as if it's fact, as if it was an absolute fact. It's shameful stuff. It really is. And then these are the same people that boohoo, whine, and cry. Why don't nobody listen to us anymore? Why don't they believe us? Why can't we influence them anymore? Well, it's because, again, you lost all your credibility. You've lied too much. You have gaslit too much. And the American people, they've decided that, you know what, we're going to tune out the media. And this is essentially just the evolution of how people consume content. It happened to the print media television, cable came along, and less people consume their content and their news via newspapers and written media and stuff like that. And they started doing it more via cable. Now with online, you have all of these platforms where people can have a voice, right? People can actually push back against the media. And when it comes to news and consuming news, people would rather just listen to regular, normal, everyday people talk about the news rather than to listen to these paid propagandists. So, hey, it is what it is. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.